Testing for captioning, 1, 2, 3. Interpreter 1, testing for captioning, 1, 2, 3.
Hello, good evening. My name is Khadijat Rashid, and I am the Dean of the Faculty at Gallaudet University. I am really, truly honored to be one of the 3 judges for today's debate, hosted by the Center for Democracy in Deaf America, featuring Gallaudet's first ever debate team. You can see their picture shown here. This image shows an aerial view of Gallaudet's Chapel Hall and the well-known tower clock with a flag waving atop it. It's evening and you can see the lights gleaming through the windows in Chapel Hall. And the words on the screen say Gallaudet University. The inaugural Gallaudet debate team will debate an important and quite interesting topic. This topic is centered on the upcoming election on November 3rd. They will debate the proposition, voting is a moral duty. Or, to be asked differently, is not voting an immoral abdication of citizenship responsibilities? The team has been divided into 2 groups, one for and another against. This doesn't necessarily reflect their personal views. It's just the team that they find themselves on this evening. Catalina Romero, who is our Debate Society president, will be arguing in the affirmative. That means that she will be arguing that voting is in fact a moral duty. She has been working alongside Claudia Smiztek, Julia Schumann, and Dalia Hernandez in developing their argument to support this proposition, that voting is in fact a moral duty. Lexi Hill, our Debate Society vice president, will be arguing in the negative, which means that she will be arguing that voting is not a moral duty. Helping her with the opposition to the proposition we just stated were her teammates, Sierra Pratt, Romel Thurman, and Jocelyn Saravia. I am really looking forward to judging this debate. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my fellow judges for this evening's debate. We have the Associate Provost, Tommy Horjas, and our COO, Dominic Lacey, who will be explaining the judges' criteria. You can see them well prepared here in our gear and swag. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Kubi. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. The slide you see on screen tells you a little bit more about what our criteria will be for the debate. The first of those criteria is to ensure that the debater is conveying the overarching big picture underlying the resolution.
The second criteria that the judges will be considering is that of civility. They must show mutual respect as they engage in their debate.
The third criterion is use of compelling evidence.
And the fourth is the power of the story that they bring to it, storytelling.
The fourth criteria is strategic responses to both opponents' rebuttals and judges' questions.
And finally, the judges are also going to be considering the debater's passion and strength.
Based on these criteria, the three of us judges will be comparing our scoring and voting for a winner this evening. Please join us in enjoying watching this coming debate. We look forward to seeing who wins out.
It's very exciting, we certainly do.
Indeed, and with that, I'd like to welcome Tabalane McDonald, who will be helping to moderate today's debate.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ntabaleng McDonald. I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I graduated from the New Mexico School for the Deaf in 2019, and I'm currently a sophomore at Gallaudet University with a major in psychology, a minor in biology, and a pre-med track. Proud to announce I'm a member of the inaugural debate team for Gallaudet. Before we go ahead with tonight's debate, I do want to give you an image description. There is a slide that shows on the right side of the slide a check mark, and on the left side bullet marks with the debate structure and the rules. So each debater will take turns using the clock on the slides. And it is all right if they are ending their argument before the clock runs out. Without further ado, let me introduce our debaters for tonight. Catalina Romero and Lexi Hill. Ms. Romero will be debating the affirmative. Ms. Hill will be debating the negative. Let the show begin. It's very exciting to watch this unfold. I'm going to ask both of them to please join us now.
Hello.
The image description of the slide. Catalina is on one side and Lexi's on the other. The words above their picture says debate with a colon, voting is a moral duty. Lexi is wearing a blue shirt. Catalina is wearing a striped green shirt. The topic of today's debate is voting is a moral duty. And it is Catalina's job to convince us that yes, in fact, voting is a moral duty, while Lexi will be arguing the opposite, that voting is not a moral duty. Now let's begin with the affirmative opening. Catalina, are you ready?
I am ready. First, I want to open with a thank you to all my teammates. Claudia, Dahlia, and Julie, thank you for your hard work. And also to everyone who is participating today. This discussion is a really important topic, and we'll be examining how and why voting is a moral duty. Let me start by reminding everyone that our Constitution has a bold phrase at the top of the document. It says, "We the people." Who are the people? It's us, the citizens of the United States. We have a duty of ensuring our democracy is alive and thriving and making moral decisions regarding that democracy and its policies. All of us have different opinions, which is perfectly fine. Those different perspectives allow us to generate a well-balanced and moral society. Voting is, in fact, a moral responsibility because we have the power to change laws to become more just, and we want to make sure that every voice is heard through their vote. I'd like to give you an example now as to why voting is a moral duty. In Maricopa County in Arizona, there was a sheriff by the name of Joe Arpaio, If you're familiar with him, you know that he is a man who was known for abusing his power as a sheriff and targeting a certain population, specifically the Latinx population, with no good reason. It wasn't until a group of volunteers took note of this and said enough is enough. And they realized it was their moral responsibility to educate citizens and encourage them on the need to vote. In the 2016 election, Joe was running against Paul Penzone. Paul Penzone was a Democrat. It was a very contested race where Paul ended up beating the incumbent sheriff. He had much better values, a better moral compass, and the Latinx community felt so relieved that they could put their trust in this man. This is a perfect example of how voting is a moral duty. It takes the collaboration and the cooperation of everyone to do their duty to make sure our system is just. Without that, we can't really get rid of all the bad apples, right? The value of our country is our vote. Voting is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Catalina. Now for the opposing opening. Lexi, if you're ready, take it away.
Yes. So before I dig into my debate, first I want to thank my teammates, Rommel, Aubrey Mormon, Jocelyn Sarabia, Nicole Pratt, for all of their significant contributions to the debate. So I'll have to get off of my moral high horse now and argue that it is not a moral duty to vote. Before doing that, I want us all to keep in mind what it means to be moral. It's an obligation to do good or to at least do no harm. So bearing that definition in mind, I want to give us a quick refresher, a trip through history. The founding fathers of America envisioned that all men would be created equal, but in fact, that was never true. There have always been minority groups, always been the oppressed and marginalized, and they do so through the policymakers who were voted into office in the first place. Look at the Trail of Tears. Look at so many travesties, slavery for 250 years, women's suffrage, not having the right to vote for so many years because of the acts of policymakers who were, in fact, voted into those positions by people who voted for them. So, in fact, it is perhaps immoral to be voting these people into office. And fall of 2020 is election. Before I get into that, first I have to tell you, I've been of two minds in terms of the candidates and their moral compass. But is it moral for us to vote for either candidate? I would say that it's not. So in an article from Stanford University, they noted that if an innocent child was sitting at bay, innocent, ready to be shot by a firing squad of 100 people, and you were invited to be the 101st person to shoot, though your shot couldn't make any difference, would it be moral for you to join the firing squad? The same is true of whether it is moral to go ahead and vote, knowing that it will result in injustice. Injustice will still happen regardless of your vote. And so, given the evils of government and the fact that we have 42 million citizens out there to vote, I would say that there's sufficient people to vote that it does not matter what I think or vote, and that to vote is to be in a privileged position and not a moral duty. In fact, we live in a world where we allow many people who are experts in their own domains to be experts in those domains. And we, the lay people, trust them to do so. So is it moral for us to be engaging in politics? We let teachers teach in the classroom because they have expertise in teaching. We wouldn't let somebody without that expertise do that. Do we have a duty to coming generations to leave that duty of voting to those with the expertise to do so?
Thank you, Lexi. Now for the affirmative rebuttal. Kat, are you ready?
Yes, I am. I noticed that you reframed voting as immoral because of our system being unjust. And that's something that I'll take from your message. I can say I experience injustice quite often. That is a very valid argument. I am the child of immigrants. And quite often people might think that they shouldn't vote because their voice is already going to be suppressed. And there are a number of bad actors and bad apples with working within this system. But we do have a duty to educate people. That is a moral responsibility that we have. If we're using our moral compass to promote and educate others to be active in this system and putting an effort into learning and spreading that awareness, quite often it doesn't happen because people aren't motivated or aren't willing to research and take the time to really get to know the candidates or laws even. I mean, but it's amazing with the technology that we have in today's world. We can Google, we can visit a candidate's website, we can find out information about them, about their policies, and we can fact check it as well to know whether or not their voting is aligned with what they say they will do. There's a lot of information getting out there today about why voting is important and why we should take advantage of that right and that duty that we have. I think it is really deeply connected to the moral obligation we have in this society to navigate the system, to learn more about ourselves, to learn more about others, to get to know their character and make a determination whether or not it's good or bad, and still respect their judgment in those situations. In the opening statement, as I said, I value different opinions, and I'm sure there are going to be plenty that don't agree with me. A healthy democracy requires that both sides are engaged and are heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Catalina. Now for the negative rebuttal. Lexi, if you're ready.
Well, I noted in your argument, and correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned Joe Arpaio and his abuse of power. The question I'd like to frame here is his moral unjust acts were as a result of him being voted in. Yes, he was voted out much later, but he, as an immoral act, was voted into that position repeatedly. And so if you speak to giving a voice to the oppressed, voter suppression prevents that. It exists so strongly that in many ways, people can't afford to get state ID or a driver's license. And there's so many barriers to it. Literacy tests and days past, and still today we see percentage of voting declining because of acts of voter suppression. So how can it be right to claim it's a moral duty when the votes of most Americans aren't counted because they don't have access to voting? So I would say that we perhaps can't, if we reframe it into doing good or not doing harm, what is the choice to try to vote when your vote cannot do good? So also, if we look at our voting system, it simply voting contributes to a system that silences the minority habitually. The voting is by its nature a majority rule system that effectively silences minorities. Another thing to think about is look at Russia. President Putin has been in power for a great many years, but he's the only name on the ballot. So is it a moral duty to vote knowing that there can be only one outcome? Is that act of voting moral?
Thank you, Lexi. Now we will have a 1-minute break to give our debaters time to develop a crossfire question. While the debaters have that moment to develop a crossfire question, I'd like to talk a bit about the debate team at Gallaudet, which has 10 student debaters now. We've been meeting regularly in class to practice and prepare for future intramural debates this semester and intercollegiate debates next semester, where we will be debating against other colleges and universities. We're always looking for debaters, If you're interested in trying out, please email our head coach at brendan.stern@gallaudet.edu. Now for the crossfire. Each person will ask one question apiece, and we'll have 1 minute 30 seconds on the clock for the response. And we'll just make sure that Catalina and Lexi are ready. When you are ready, please turn on your videos. Catalina will start by asking Lexi a question. Take it away.
Okay, I sure am ready. My question for you, if you don't vote, what other way do we have to perpetuate our democracy and ensure that it is done morally?
To clarify, I say that voting should exist. I argue, however, that it's not a moral duty to vote. Voting may be a healthy way to promote a continuing democracy. It may be a great thing in and of itself. However, I argue against it being a moral duty to vote. Because again, without voting, democracy may really not be able to exist. Democracy is comprised of the people. So you can't do that without voting. But voting is in itself not a moral duty. Look at American history, rife with immoral acts and immoral histories. Stolen land from indigenous people, enslavement of people. Even when it was time for the South to secede from the US, they took a vote on that action of secession. So it is not the case that voting itself is a moral duty. It's that framing objective.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lexi, for your response. It's now your turn to ask Catalina a question.
Okay. Okay, so I noted you say that the Constitution opens with "we the people," but I would argue that it's immoral not to take everyone's opinion into consideration. If we live in a country where everybody is of a different opinion in a democracy, is it immoral not to take everyone's position into account?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. I think if you think about myself and preservation, some people might view it as selfish, but I think it's moral because I'm doing the most good for myself and I can advise others who might have similar experiences to me. Like you brought up women's suffrage and previously being oppressed and unable to vote. I have the opportunity now to speak out against that and say, what about me to ensure that I'm doing my part to fight back and be engaged and be involved. Self-determination and self-preservation is a good thing. We need those variety of opinions. We need to make sure that everybody is heard, to make sure that there are things maybe that we think are incorrect. We could be swayed if we hear a new opinion. Thank you.
Thank you both for your responses. We will now have another 1-minute break for our debaters to prepare their closing statements and for the judges to agree on a question to ask each debater. While they're preparing for their closing statements, I'll make a few remarks. As you all know, we have a presidential election coming up this fall, and we will be witnessing debates between President Trump and Joe Biden, along with Kamala Harris and Vice President Pence. As you watch those debates, keep in mind that their format may be different, but the art of rhetoric, argumentation, and debate remain the same. In fact, this is why politicians from Nelson Mandela to Kamala Harris were competitive debaters in college. That's another reason why you should consider trying out for our debate team or joining the debate bowl for high school and middle school students, hosted by Gallaudet Youth Programs and the Center for Democracy in Deaf America, CDDA, next semester. More details will be announced soon. And now it's time for the judges to ask the questions. And they've all agreed that Dr. Rashid will represent the judges at this stage. Thank you. Wow, fascinating to watch the debate as it was unfolding. The argumentation was really impressive for both of you. Thank you for your opening statements and questions. Your rebuttals, the crossfire questions. So now it's our turn. The judges will ask a question. We've all agreed on the question we want to ask you. And the first question is for Catalina. If voting is a moral right, but we know that some people in the United States can't vote for various reasons, they might be DACA recipients, how can we justify that voting is a moral right if some people are prevented from voting?
Yes, thank you for asking me that question. Of course, some people out there are unable to vote. From my perspective, with voting, we can provide them with different ways to get involved via activism or protests to ensure that their voices are heard. That's something we must do to make sure that they are members of the movement. For the people who can't vote, they can reach out to those who are empowered, those who are privileged, and ask for their help and ask for the activism and the work to be done on their part if they're unable to do so. Voting is a platform to speak out. It's a platform to make change. And that is the reason that I think it's immoral. I think it's the reason that we must do good.
Thank you. Thank you, Catalina. Now to Lexi, we have a question for you. If voting is not a moral duty, how can we enfranchise even more people into our society and our Constitution? How can we make changes to expand liberty if we see a diminishing of the voting numbers? How can we make changes in our society?
I apologize. Would you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. If voting is not a moral duty or right, how can we bring the majority of the people along to vote, which is the critical way that our Constitution can be amended? How can we bring people forward if it's not a moral duty and voting is the only way to impact changes? How can we encourage people to vote? If fewer and fewer people are involved, how can we make changes in our society? What other mechanism might there be?
Wow, a very important question. And I would impress upon you that there are a great many ways to affect change in the world. We see that in protests today. We see that in people serving jury duty. We see that in all kinds of civic duties. And participation in government happens in many ways, not merely by voting. Now, you also ask, how can we bring people into the act of voting if it's not a moral duty? I would call it instead a civic duty as a citizen. I would suggest that, if you make it mandatory to vote, people will not. They have other responsibilities, other cares and needs that are prioritized. You could perhaps make it mandatory, perhaps even make it a national holiday where people still earn a day's living. That might increase it, but the argument that it is a moral requirement is not in and of itself good and correct.
Thank you. I think that both of you have given very thoughtful responses. There are some countries who have tried the approach of mandatory voting, as Lexi suggested, or have made it a holiday so that people are paid, or have it on a weekend when more people can go. And that does seem to result in higher participation numbers. Other countries, people have gone through such strife to win the right to vote that they absolutely would not stay home. So I can sort of see different ways of approaching this question. And it is a debate worth having. I will now yield the floor to my compatriot in Tabalang and thank the two of you. Thank you, Dr. Rashid. And thank you all. Now it's time for closing statements. We're going to begin with the affirmative. Catalina, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Voting is our power. Voting can be used as a tool to examine our moral duty by ensuring that we do this moral duty of ours. We are giving others the freedom to really explore their own morality, and what it means. There were great points raised tonight about different forms of injustice. And of course, there are injustices that we see in America. People aren't always able to vote. We see opinions clash. We see a number of different issues arise within this system. However, voting still is a moral duty that we have, a duty that we are directed to respect. And I think respect is a critical part of this. Everyone's opinions can be brought to a table, differing opinions and perspectives and life experiences really are a beautiful way to display the beauty within our country, the diversity that we have. Fighting for what you care about is something that you should do, and you want to do it in a way that others can follow. This quote was stated by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, telling other people to get out to vote, whether it's your friends, whether it's your family, or anyone who's interested in having a conversation with you, is a healthy and constructive way to build up and uphold our democracy. So get out there and vote. Thank you.
And now it's time for the negative closing. Lexi, are you ready?
Yes, I am. So I'll again state that it is not a moral duty to vote. Voting merely for the act of voting is immoral. It's immoral to justify and prop up immoral practices and policies. I've talked about voter suppression, the fact that not everyone has access to vote and be heard. How can we then claim it's a moral duty and compel people to vote when we disenfranchise people and so that they cannot vote and all do not have access to that vote? And I spoke before of the analogy of a teacher. Let's look then to farming and farmers. We must have farmers, but everybody doesn't have to farm so that we can eat. We have farmers who are the breadbasket of the country so that we can all eat. And not everybody is an agriculturalist today. So finally, I'll say that voting is not a moral duty. It does not represent the best interest of everyone, especially when it comes to immoral contest of parties. And in fact, there's an obligation to not do harm. And by voting for immoral candidates doing harm with their policies, we then contribute to doing harm. So voting it's not really moral. In fact, it's not a moral duty and maybe immoral.
Thank you both. You can now both turn off your cameras. We're going to be waiting for the judges to fill out their scoring sheet. They'll announce the victor and discuss their thoughts. While we're waiting, I'll give you an image description. On the slide, you see the members of the debate team. There are 5 on the top and 5 on the bottom. Nicole Pratt is wearing a turquoise colored t-shirt, majoring in biology. Next to Nicole is Catalina Romero from Riverside, California, who's majoring in social work, a senior at Gallaudet. And then we have Romel Thurman from the Bay Area, California, majoring in physical education and recreation, PER, and he's currently a junior. Then moving right along, we see Lexi Hill, currently a sophomore from Tyler, Texas, majoring in history and government. And the final person on that row is myself, Metabalang McDonald. I'm currently a sophomore from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm majoring in psychology. Moving down, we've got Dahlia Hernandez, who's majoring in education. Then we have Aubrey Mormon, sophomore, who has not declared a major yet. Then still working my way through the bottom row, we have Jocelyn Saravia, a sophomore from Richmond, Virginia, who's majoring in arts and media design. Next to Jocelyn, we have Julia Schumann, a sophomore from Charlestown, West Virginia, who's majoring in social work and government. And finally, we have our head coach, Brendan Stern, on the top left. And then we have our assistant coach, Adam Bartley, whose name is found on the top right. Underneath both of our coaches are their email addresses. While we're waiting for Dr. Rashid, Dr. Horges, and Mr. Lacey to fill out the scoring sheet, announce the victor, and discuss their thoughts, I'd like to talk a bit about debating and why it's important for today's youth to learn how to debate. Too often, disagreements become ugly, and nobody learns from them. If we all learn how to debate with civility and respect, we'll be able to learn more from each other. If you're interested in debating, after watching today's debate, come to Gallaudet and join our debate society. And you can even try out for the new debate team that will compete against other colleges. Catalina, Lexi, Dr. Horges, and Dominic, please join us. Wow.
Great job.
I
Great
was
job.
taking notes. You've given me so much to think about. I want to first start with Catalina. I'm not sure if you've researched any of my background, but I went to Arizona State University. I'm very involved with Sheriff Arpaio story. And I saw through that experience the importance of voting, because he kept being voted in by a very small group of people who were his constituents, and many people were disenfranchised and could not therefore vote him out. Finally, with the education and the awareness raising that the community undertook, he was no longer in office. A very powerful story to share. So I appreciated that. And the fact that you come from an immigrant background also added to the strength of your storytelling. You mentioned the Trail of Tears. I wonder if there are more recent examples that we could share, because that is a fairly old example. I don't know how relevant it would be to judges. I mean, clearly we see the history, but you might consider a more recent issue to make it relevant. Dom, do you want to say your comments to Catalina next?
So I think you did a great job on discussing why voting is a moral duty. I think you did a good job of describing that, though I wish you'd done more to help your argument in telling us how the country values a vote. You made one comment about it, but didn't tell me as much as I would like about that, because I believe you could make a stronger argument if you would focus on that point. Show the connection between the vote and the country, the value of it, and what makes it a moral obligation. Now, in terms of exhibits and evidence, I do want to mention that you used some examples and brought in personal narratives that were great and fantastic. Some of the historical context that you described in your argument were things that I would like to see updated, more recent examples, recent cases. Now, I think the personal narratives are always good. They help people to understand and see your passion. So I think that's always good to try to tie in your personal stories as you can with the important values that are based in the discussion you're having on an action and decision, whether it's moral or immoral. And so those were the remarks I had for you.
Turning now to Lexi, I saw a very powerful argumentation. When you talked about voter suppression, you really talked about the system and the problems we have within the system, that this system is not effective as it is currently operating. And how can we have a moral duty to reinforce a system that is basically at its core corrupt? Very powerful argumentation. I think actually you could have expanded that part even more so. And then you talked about voting not representing the best interests of everyone. Again, a very powerful statement that I was blown away by, that if voting is really reflecting all of us, and in fact it isn't, that there are many people who can't vote. And Catalina mentioned coming from an immigrant family and the DACA recipients. Absolutely, that's a very strong example. I would have liked to have seen you give some examples why immigrant families, for example, are unable to vote. I think that would have been reinforcing your point about it not being a moral duty, because it really goes back to the philosophical understanding of morality. If we know people are going to be rejected from this system, then this system, it's not morally okay to allow this system to continue, in this case, a system of voting. I'm still a little bit confused about moral duty. You said we as citizens should be able to vote, but it's not a moral duty. And that took me a moment, because it seemed like you're saying voting is important, but it's not a duty. So as a judge, just in terms of the debate structure, it was a bit confusing. I would have liked to see you say, if voting is not a moral duty, then that would lead to a decline of the voting system overall, which might lead to a change in the system and the laws. You know, that would be another approach, sort of walk us down that road of how can we get to equality and equity. Dom, what are your thoughts?
Lexi, I saw in your argument there were some very strong components to your argument regarding technology. I would like for you to have defined what it means to be moral. You said that it means to do no harm, but to give more context to that, more meat to the argument. Do we have a moral duty to vote? And you described a number of immoral things that have happened as a result of voting. But where the argument falls apart is counterexamples. And those kinds of arguments are always held back. But just because an immoral thing happens as a result of an action, it doesn't mean the action is immoral. So that's where I'm kind of stuck. So that's one bit of feedback in terms of thinking through how you define what is moral, and some of the other counter arguments that aren't so focused on the morality of the situation as the result of the vote, but the act of the vote. So with that, that completes my general feedback. I really did think you both did great. I very much appreciated watching your debate.
Great job.
And so with that, I'm going to invite Kubi to join us to announce the winner.
Hello again. Wow, there were so many things that happened on either side that I was just so ready to affirm and agree with. I so enjoyed both of you and your performance tonight. I think that you gave us all some great food for thought, certainly in how it ties into the upcoming election we have. And we know how important it is for our country to get us all to agree to get there. And you can see my shirt, I'm representing the fact that voting is crucial. Whether or not it's a moral duty, I will not say, but if you vote, if you can vote, you should. So thank you so much for the colorful debate tonight. The judges have deliberated and went back and forth and came to our final decision. It was unanimous. The winner of this debate this evening is Catalina Romero. Congratulations to you, Catalina.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Lexi, you did a great job as a debater, making your argument about the fact that voting should happen, which technically was done well, but we found the argument to be lacking. And we did not feel the same with Catalina. Great job to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. And I have to tell you, I do in fact believe that voting is a moral duty, but it's so very interesting to debate.
And be challenging. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
All right. I would like to now invite Untitled to come and join us again.
Thank you. Well, congratulations to the winner, and thank you to both outstanding debaters for making time in your busy schedule to give us a different lens through which to understand the role of voting in our society. At this point, I'd like to let the judges take over.
Thank you.
I do want to reiterate the thanks to our moderator this evening. It is so wonderful to see you doing such a great job facilitating, and I am proud of the work that you did here tonight. All right, judges, do we have any additional comments and final thoughts?
The three of us watched this debate and saw that it shows the importance of debating skills. It's so important for our young generation who are going to be leaders to hone their debating skills on all sorts of different topics, such as voting. We live in a free and democratic society, which means that we are born into a society that privileges debating, and persuasion is one of the few ways that we can get what we want. We can't bribe people or coerce them, like in some other countries. That is not the American way. So if we want to achieve our goals, whether it's to convince a teacher to give us an extension on an assignment, or to convince our fellow Americans to make this country truly inclusive and equitable, it is incumbent upon us that we build our rhetorical skills to be able to articulate our argument in the most persuasive way possible and be able to see all sides so that we can get our point across. That's our main way to get our point across and to make change.
Competitive debate has long been considered the great equalizer, especially for minorities, in achieving their educational opportunities. You might wonder why, but it fosters tolerance for difference. It cultivates critical thinking by making participants consider multiple perspectives and polishes public speaking skills.
I could not agree more. Debating is crucial to a free and democratic society. We don't use our bodies, we use our words to debate, which is something I'm constantly trying to instill in my children, to err on the side of using the words and not their physicality. It's important that we recognize people as people of color, as deaf people, as immigrants, as Native, Indigenous people, that we need to be represented in all levels of government, not just at a federal level, but local, municipal, and a state level as well. It's crucial. The impact that we can make in the taxes that we pay or simple things that we do as Americans are impacted by the votes that we cast on election day. We should be voting in every election. It's crucial. That's how we make our quote unquote voice heard in a democracy. Does not matter where you stand. Is it a moral duty? Is it not? Vote, vote, vote. Any final thoughts, gentlemen?
I will say that debate is fundamental to the mission of Gallaudet. And the art of debate is critical to us because it fosters intellectual, professional advancement by empowering our students, inviting them to challenge each other and to go deeper on an argument. That empowerment of our students means that they then can grapple with challenging ideas. And in today's society, we are confronted with so many challenging ideas. Debate is a way to empower our students to grapple with these thorny ideas in a bilingual way. Because at Gallaudet, of course, we privilege both English and American Sign Language. And that enriches our thoughts. As John Stuart Mill said, he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. It's an opportunity for us to expand our understanding through this rhetorical skill.
Well, my final thoughts include the fact that debate reflects the university's commitment to free and open inquiry in all matters. Our guarantee to all members of the university community to the broadest possible latitude to sign, write, listen, challenge, and learn. Debate is central to the health of American democracy. In a country of over 300 million people who naturally disagree about many things, the ability to conceive, articulate, and evaluate arguments amidst disagreement is the lifeblood of democracy. That is how our democracy can thrive and flourish.
Some of you watching tonight might be new to this concept of debate. This idea was born from Brendan Stern last year, who decided to start the Center for Democracy in Deaf America. That idea was shared with others, and all of the administration at Gallaudet University were in staunch support of this. And that was last year. And then this was pre-pandemic, this was pre-election, this was before all of that was even a thought in our mind. We knew that we needed a place for debate to happen, a place for us to disagree productively. In the past year, that idea has grown and so much has taken place if we look back even in just the last 6 months of our lives. The Center for Democracy in Deaf America is more needed than ever. I really, really enjoyed watching tonight's debate, thinking about the context that got us here today. I am just so floored by it, and I wanted to spotlight that work that was done to get us here. I'm excited about the future, the intramural debates this semester, and the debate bowl for our middle school and high school students. It will all be hosted by the Center for Democracy in Deaf America, the debate team, and the youth programs at Gallaudet. Make sure debate, but of course for the youth programs, they don't only focus on debates. There are a number of different programs that they have available to you as well. Keep your eyes peeled for more information that'll be forthcoming, and I hope you'll keep watching, or even better, participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now I would like to turn it over to Professor Breen. Please join us. Thank you so much, Kubi. Welcome, everyone. Welcome again. My name is Kate Breen, and I am the Director for Civic Engagement for the Center on Democracy in Deaf America. We just wrapped up our debate for the evening, and this was the first time we've decided to host such an event, and we're so excited to have more in the future. At this time, I would like to welcome our panelists to join us. They are joining us from a number of different professions and backgrounds, and they have fascinating things to say this evening. This panel's topic is how to vote and why vote. First up, we'll be bringing up Mr. McCowan, who is the Executive Director for the Deaf Poor People's Campaign and one of our co-sponsors for the evening. Take it away, sir. Oh, excuse me. Focusing on building bridges within the deaf community. There you go, sir.
Hello, hello. My name is Richard McCowan. I'm an intern for the Poor People's Campaign, known as the PPC. The PPC is a movement focusing on 4 main areas: dismantling systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, poverty rife in the country is one of our aims. And let's see. And the war economy. Our economy favors programs for war rather than programs for people. We would like to put an emphasis on everyone's right to live. there is a subgroup of the Poor People's Campaign that is deaf-led, wherein we are working with the PPC and the DPCC, working to ensure that a focus on our needs is imbued in the PCC and that the information of the PCC is distributed throughout the larger deaf community. So this Saturday, September 26th, from 4 to 6, we will have a workshop. The workshop is entitled Your Vote Counts. It's about the 2020 election. The workshop will be covering a number of topics, like the history of voting, how to measure the accuracy of the information you see online, voter suppression, mail-in voting, and many more. We will be collaborating with other organizations, such as Gallaudet University, the Center for Democracy in Deaf America, CDDA, NTID, and Sign Vote. So mark your calendars for this Saturday, September 26th, from 4 to 6 p.m. We will send a link to register in the chat box and on the Facebook feed, as well as our Deaf Poor People's Campaign site. There will be a clickable link that you can use to register for the event on Saturday. We also have other exciting events. We have the hashtag that we use, hashtag #DeafVotesCount, where we ask people to take a selfie showing that they have voted. We have an email campaign trying to spread that hashtag out there. We also have 30-second to 1-minute videos that we invite you to submit on why voting is important to you or why you would encourage others to vote. You can participate in either or both of those campaigns. DPPC welcomes all of you to join our efforts, get involved, and get the vote out there. Thank you very much for your time. And we are ready and excited to see more of your panel.
Thank you so much, Mr. McCowan. We really appreciate you and the DPPC support. Now, I would like to introduce Zainab Al-Kebsi, who is a lawyer, an attorney and counsel with the National Association for the Deaf, and will be the moderator for our panel.
Thank you, Kate. As Kate said, I am Zainab Al-Kebsi, and I will be tonight's moderator. Because of the unique nature of a virtual panel, the panelists received their assigned 2 to 3 questions in advance and will appear when I call on them. Our objective for this panel is that it is not a forum for political debate. Rather, it is centered around the importance of registering and choosing to vote. When the panelists are finished, the audience will have an opportunity to ask them follow-up questions. And you'll do that by typing in the comment box on the Facebook feed. Now, you may recognize our panelists from promotions on social media. They're going to be introducing themselves in alphabetical order. So first I'll call on Trisha Elaine. Please turn on your video.
Hi, my name's Trisha Lane. I'm Trisha, and I am the coordinator of residence education at LLHR6 at Gallaudet University.
Thank you, Trisha. And now Director Kelby Brick, please turn on your camera. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Zainab. I am Kelby Brick. I'm the Director of Maryland Governor's Office. That's Governor Larry Hogan's Office of Deaf and Hard of Hearing here in Maryland, and I am delighted to be with you tonight. Thank you, Kelby. Next, we have Leila Hanami.
Hi, everyone. Ooh, get myself situated. My son's running around the background here. Hi, I am Leila Hanami, and I am the Strategic Engagement Director with Communication Services for the Deaf, and I'm also representing Sign Vote tonight, as you can see, which is a campaign under CSD. Thank you.
Great shirt, Leila. I also have a child running around. Hopefully they're sleeping. Next, we move on to Dr. Joseph Santini.
Hello, and thank you. I'm Joseph Santini, and I am Director of Instruction for the Clare Center. Also, an equal partner in our and local deaf business.
I'm now ready to begin with the questions. And that is going to be, can we show that question, please? The question is, have you personally ever voted? And if so, please describe the process of registering and actually voting. Have you missed any elections? If so, why? And this question is directed to Joseph and Trisha. So if you two will turn on your cameras, please.
Hello. Thank you. Great question. So, have I voted? Indeed, I have, and I'm happy to share my own stories of voting. For me, voting has been a family event my whole life. I've grown up in the Bronx through my teen years with my father, and our community was a strongly Puerto Rican community. Every year, I would stand in line to vote with my father, and it was a social and community-based event, a time of celebration. And my memories of voting were always of a celebratory act. The first time I registered to vote was when I was 18. And I registered at the DMV in New York. It was a pretty easy system. Most states allow you to register when you're getting your license at the DMV, and you can register by mail or via the internet. And I had to decide what party to join. And it's important for you to know that you can register for either party and still vote for any party you wish in the election. So when I was 18, I voted in the Green Party. I registered for that party, whether I was going to vote for them or not, because of my love for the environment. Later, I moved to Maryland and had to register to vote again. Registering there, I registered as a Democrat. And in my memory, I have voted in my local polling places. And in New York, that was a church. When I moved to Maryland, the polling place has been the local middle school. And every year, despite long lines, I'm always willing to wait and vote because I feel a sense of empowerment in voting. From the first time I voted on a paper ballot to last year, the first time I did it on a touch screen. I also remember voting at 18 years old. We were voting in the presidential election, and I was looking to a hotly contested race that time, one of the most important things. But later, I learned that that's not always the most important thing to vote on. Other issues can be very important at play. Police brutality is an issue that plays out on local and state levels. In my 30s, I began to vote in every election and not merely presidential elections. I looked especially to local positions, mayors, city and state government, those making decisions that impact us at the local level. especially those in charge of police forces. Those are critical votes to look to. We want to have as much voting power as we can to prevent us ever again having another Breonna Taylor story to tell again. So that we can only do that through the power of voting.
Thank you. Tricia.
So I have memories of voting, not when I was 18. I didn't see the importance of it at the time. My parents didn't really discuss the importance of voting until I began to learn more about it on my own. During my time at Gallaudet was when I saw a lot of stress being put on the importance of it. As I've become older, in my 30s, I've learned much more about the power of voting and the importance of it. And it is profoundly important. It affects my own future, my employment, my life, my education, the failing prison systems, the systems of institutionalized racism embedded in police forces, all of that. Another 4 years, imagine if you don't vote, what you contribute to that. So when I think about all the opportunities to vote that I missed, I am disgusted. I now eagerly register to vote. And I filled out my absentee ballot to be sure I absolutely get my vote counted no matter what. That is critical. You know, whether it be to a change of address or changing your driver's license, I'm making sure that anytime I move, I readily have my license so that I can even vote the same day with your license in hand. I want to make sure that I never have to miss a chance to vote because of the absence of a driver's license or anything like that. So now from here on out, I can tell you I'm never missing another vote again. I will be a faithful voter. And just as was recently said, you know, it's not only about presidential elections, Congress, the governor, mayor, all of these positions in local and state government are critically important. You know, and when you see these signs out there telling you to vote for different candidates, you know who they are in your area. With just a little effort to research, you can find out more about them and their policies and who's going to best serve your city, your state. Be sure that they're going to do what is morally right by the people of their jurisdiction. We know we have prison systems that need to be fixed. To do that, we have to vote. We have to be engaged. It's so important to support our right and duty to vote.
Thank you, Tricia. You both shared very interesting points. Often people are focused on just the big race, the presidential race, when in fact so many other elections are impactful on a daily level. And Joseph, you talked about the experiences that you had with your family. Tricia, you talked about the lack of access to information that is a serious issue that the deaf and hard of hearing community faces specifically. And in terms of missing elections, I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there who, don't know how to get an absentee ballot, or maybe they were working and they couldn't get to the polling place that day. A lot of us are working on those days. And so there are concerns that people don't want to take off work. It's absolutely things that we need to think about on a systemic level. And as was said earlier, whether it's a national holiday or move to a weekend, something that we can take collective action on to fix. So I want to thank the both of you and ask for the next question to be displayed. Question number 2. Do deaf people vote at a similar rate as hearing people? How about people of color and white people? What factors drive those differences? What factors keep people out of the electoral process? This question is directed to Leila and Joseph. So please turn on your cameras. Let's start with you, Leila.
This is important. And I do want to say thank you to Joseph. We talked briefly before this panel, and he found me some information that I needed for the National Deaf Center, reaching out to them to get some crucial resources that I needed. There's not much data on deaf people specifically. We don't have it, and we know that we need it. We can look at some numbers specifically for people with disabilities, and we know that they vote less than able-bodied people, sometimes at a rate of 20% less than them. There are a number of reasons. For one, for the word deaf, how do we categorize deaf people when we're thinking about, do they vote less, right? Are we saying that they have the ability to speak and hear, or what sort of identity range are they in their deafness? Do they use ASL? Can they hear? Can they use their voice? Are they part of the ASL signing community? There are so many different demographics within that one main demographic category that we know we need more information, we need more research. We can say anywhere from 10 to 20% for the BIPOC community as well. About the Black community has about 5% less voter turnout. Latinx and Asian is almost at 30%. And those are the factors that were just mentioned recently. If you think about privilege, and the more layers of privilege that I have, the more likely I am to vote and be engaged as a voter. Because, you know, first you have to think about, do I see myself reflected in the faces of the elected officials that are running a candidacy in those different races? And have I seen them throughout my childhood? Think about a lack of information as well. We are considered a linguistic minority as a deaf community. Growing up, having access to information about the political system came directly from our teachers, and that was it. The radio, not so much. The TV did not have captions at the time. We didn't see ASL on TV. And now, of course, we're very happy to see we have deaf newscasters. We have information that's shared in a variety of forms and in our own native language. It's becoming more accessible as well, but the ballots are still in written English. Sometimes they're even challenging for me, myself, even with all the work I've done. I still have trouble understanding the ballot sometimes. And I'm an English major, so you have to think about the lack of access to information as well. Also, let's think about physical barriers for people with other types of disabilities. I want to say it's like 27% of polling places are accessible, 27%. So that means almost 70 to 80% don't have access for people who are wheelchair users or assistive listening devices or other types of access that they might need. So a person might show up, stand in a line, not know where that line is leading them, and then not have access to the written English on the ballot. A number of barriers stand in the way. You have to think about people's job as well. Is my supervisor flexible to taking time off? Do I know my rights, the rights that I have to request time off to go and vote? If you think about other minority groups who might be less able to take the time off, like Trisha experienced recently, realized later that she had to advocate for herself. Those types of barriers are there and are ways in which voter suppression continues to be perpetuated in our society. We have to push for change. We have to speak out against this. I think the good news is that in the midterms, we did see an increase in voting by BIPOC individuals by about 18%. So I guess we'll see what happens in 2020.
Thank you, Leila. Joseph.
I mean, you really covered a great deal of that. I would just reinforce that the research is almost non-existent on deaf voters. I found one small study that looked at a cohort of 16 people and examined their voting habits. And only half of them had voted in this group of deaf people. But it begs the question of why people vote. It also asks us how engaged we are in our political lives, how much we see ourselves reflected there. In business and government, do we see ourselves in candidates' websites and in their platforms? Do they mention anything about deaf, hard of hearing people, language deprivation, access to ASL? Very often, we're disengaged from politics in the US because we don't see ourselves reflected in the politics of the nation. And we see increasing representation of Black and Latina peoples and increased participation that's commensurate with that. And so I think part of our goal in school here is to ensure that we're educating our young people to become more politically literate voters. In New York, I would say New York doesn't just encourage students to vote and be politically involved. There are voting drives where people will herd you to go to the polling places to encourage you to vote. Great efforts that really guide the students through that process. And I think it's powerful in changing the picture of voting for young people in New York City. I've been involved in that program now for my 3rd year, and helping seniors to register to vote. I was first participating in that in 2020, and it's a powerful program. I would love to see that done by student body governments, junior NAD, in our schools for the deaf, and get something like that rolled out on a national level so that we're engaged in political issues and not disengage from those policies and programs that are affecting us. I do want to add to my discussion in terms of looking at the curriculum in schools. How are we teaching students about politics and engagement with politics? What is it that we're teaching them? How do we teach them to assess articles on political ideas? Do we teach them to be passive receptacles of political notions, or actually critically analyzing them? Black Lives Matter curriculums are being rolled out in schools across the country. They're being used in a number of high schools. And that started some 6 years ago. And looking and examining the high school environment and changing the notions of political awareness in communities. We want to be doing that here in the Clairson, and we might be the only deaf school in the country with that Black Lives Matter curriculum that I know of. I would like to see more of that in play in our schools so that our students become more politically savvy and understand the political landscape of the United States and are more connected to and engaged with that political landscape. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I do want to highlight a couple of the remarks that you've both shared with us. So there's a lack of data. We clearly need more data so that we can strategize, figure out where the gaps are and how we might better mitigate those issues. We don't know what they are if we don't have the data. The lack of access to information was also mentioned, as Leila mentioned. Sign Vote is an organization working to mitigate that. And if you're not following Sign Vote on social media, I encourage the audience to check them out. And NAD, the National Association of the Deaf, also has an ASL hotline, and you can call using your video phone. Volunteers are ready to answer your questions in sign language, and you can find that phone number on our website, NAD. And Joseph, you talked about outreach that has to happen to youth. And one of the powerful things that has happened is if there are more deaf representatives in government, deaf ambassadors, deaf Congress members, deaf mayors, then that will motivate the next generation to get involved. So thank the two of you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
And I'll ask for the third question to be displayed, please. We did talk about some of these issues briefly, but what is the difference between voting locally, such as a town council or state legislature race, as to voting nationally? And how is each level significant to you? This question is directed towards Kelby and Leila. If you would please turn your cameras on.
Hello, who should go first? Okay. Well, each of these layers of government is important. If I have a complaint about the system, something I would like to see changed or improved, I can do so by voting at each of these levels, not only at every 4-year mark. Some elections are held annually, some biannually, and many of them are staggered with different terms. There are both presidential elections and varying congressional elections. And so it's so important to be engaged at all of those levels. In Maryland, we have a number of local deaf people in Howard County who have been very politically involved and engaged and voting in their local councils, in their local executive directors for their cities and councils have become more aware of deaf people in their electorate. And they're asking more and engaging more from those deaf people in their jurisdictions. Hospitals in many of the areas are not good with living up to their obligations for interpreters and access. Engagement with these elected officials has been a tool to call to task these CEOs of these institutions and hospitals and create change in those hospital policies. That happens through the power of local voting and engagement. I think there are a number of other examples that could be cited, but state level engagement is also important. Governors and state legislators are important in that they pass a number of bills that have an effect on our lives. In the last several years, we see, in fact, Zainab, you are aware of a number of the new works that you have been involved in, captioning in public spaces, bars, restaurants, gyms, and so forth. That was mandated. And the first deaf culture digital library is another result of the work of political activism and engagement at the state level. Voting and engagement with political leaders, being sure that they see us and our civic engagement, creates greater recognition for us and our group, and that increases the power of our vote and our influence with those elected officials. Doing so at every level embeds us in the political life and landscape of those leaders. Not mere glad handling, but if we're looking at local mayors reaching out to us to better have a track on how to best serve deaf people, they're going to do so by reaching out to people that they know are politically engaged in their jurisdiction, because deaf people have voted and been engaged with that elected official and been sure that those elected officials aren't forgetting the deaf people in their population. Especially as demographics change, it's important to continually be engaged on all of those levels. And politics differ in every landscape. It's important to have multiple views at the table and to be understood by people of varying parties. Not everybody is going to be different, and so be the same. And so it's important for all of us, among our differences and with all of our differences, to be politically engaged so that those political leaders have a sense of all of us as their electorate.
Just for the audience, Kelby is now the director of an office that I used to work at. That's why he made the comment about me being involved in some of that earlier legislation. But Leila, what are your thoughts?
Of course, I do want to echo what Kelby said. I know I sometimes am guilty of only focusing on the presidential election every 4 years, getting on with my life and kind of forgetting about politics. I mean, this is something that I think is pretty rampant. There is the opportunity for checks and balances, right? We know that the president doesn't have all of the power. There's a reason that we vote in congressmen and senators to make sure that then trickles down and impacts on a local level as well. You look at the presidential candidates. Previously, we had President Obama, who was a senator first. So right now, you have to think about us voting in the people who later could potentially be our president. For myself personally, at a federal level, I'm really thinking about how it impacts my life on a regular basis. Thinking about the ADA, for example, we recently had the 30th anniversary of the enactment of that law. Could you imagine our lives without the ADA? I surely can't. Also, if you want to think about the amendment that gave women the right to vote, obviously that has a great impact on me as an individual. I'm thinking more locally. I'm thinking about the response to COVID-19. The states had such a varied response. Here in Texas, I was trying to keep an eye on, what that entailed. Our governor from the get-go, or maybe it was Labor Day weekend, I want to say, said that all the pools and everything were closing. And that's how the local officials were handling this crisis situation. And that had a direct impact on me, my neighbors, and our health and safety. Another thing that came to mind was Lead K. Lead K has a huge impact on our state. The states that have passed the Lead K bill means that we're going to see the effect of that. The states, most likely, parents who have hearing children who are unaware of the deaf community, then have a deaf child, are going to have better exposure to opportunities for their deaf child to thrive if they live in a state that passed Lead K to avoid language deprivation and to allow for language acquisition. And so those are the kind of things that just scratched the surface and came up to me when I did some research about this. I do think it's very important to realize that at all elections, at all levels, they are important in their own ways.
And I think we agree that too often people are focused on just the presidential election, and it really takes up a lot of the media oxygen, and that completely overlooks some of the local or smaller elections that are quite impactful on people's daily life. Property taxes, the school that your children will go to. There are so many issues that really are impacted at the local or city or state level. Midterm elections as well don't get quite enough play. So thank you to the two of you, and I'll ask that the next question be displayed. And this question simply asks, what does voting mean to you? And we'll ask Trisha and Kelby to please come answer these questions. Trisha, I'll call on you first.
All right. So what does voting mean to me? It's really important. For voters, you're using your voice, you're stating your opinion, especially amidst all the chaos that we're seeing today. If you think about racism and how it affects people physically and mentally in this society, voting allows you to pick the person who's running your city, your state, the senator, the state legislatures, mayors, council people, housing representatives. For me personally, I don't care if a person is a Democrat or a Republican. I'm voting for a specific person who's going to do right by the constituents of their home city or state. Somebody who's out there meeting people, somebody who's not just looking for votes, but is recognizing or has the ability to recognize that they're going to speak for you, they're going to hear you out, like Kelby mentioned, access to sign language interpreters at hospitals or what have you, just making sure that somebody's listening to me and somebody's doing right by me when they're placing their vote. If I think about that individual or somebody who tells me that voting is pointless and they don't think that their voice will be heard, I'm often pretty sad. And I want to tell them that it's going to impact their life, not just for the next 4 years, but if you think about your job, the economy, your civil rights, education, the prison system, specifically if you are a Black or Latinx person, somebody who thinks that you might commit, a minor crime as opposed to somebody who is white, the outcomes are very, very different for those individuals. And you should be able to voice your opinion. You should get yourself out there and make sure that you're fighting against a system that has been failing us as people of color. If I think about women's rights and police reform bills, the whole idea of defunding the police because of the brutality used against Black and brown people, thinking about what we can do, we need to make sure that we're taking money away from them and investing it in other people. We want to make sure, or other entities, we want to make sure that citizens trust the police force because they certainly don't now. They're living in fear of the police. Everywhere we go, we have a heightened sense of anxiety, fear that we might be pulled over, and an increased heart rate just because we're scared of the police. Your vote has the ability to help ease some of that. And it really, in elections, it really shows people's true colors. People are outing themselves as racist all the time. And I know that I cannot afford to miss this election for that reason. We're getting so close. It's next month. It's November 3rd. It's a really big deal for me. I am so hyped in anticipation for this right now. We think about the deaf community specifically, not having access to education or the concept of voting until we're much later in life. I want to make sure I'm getting the word out so that young people know that they have a right and really encouraging them to research, to do their homework, and please not become a statistic as a non-voter. I think if you become a statistic, that one mere time that you decide not to vote can really cripple or impact the entire system. One vote means a lot to me. It has a huge impact. So like I said, do your homework, research, make sure we get the right people elected into the different state and local positions.
You, Trisha. Kelby.
Trisha, your words are so powerful. I stand convinced. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks.
Voting is crucial for all the reasons that you stated. We weekly are putting out new videos about voting, how to vote, how to get registered, how to get your ballot, how to drop it off. Every week we've been doing these informational videos, and we'll be doing so right up to the election to ensure that we are encouraging deaf people to be comfortable in the process. And very often, we know that we have the right to do so, but don't engage. Where that vote is so critical. We need those votes to be present and counted. Women, for example, weren't permitted to vote until 1920. And so then, that means deaf women couldn't vote until 1920. Indigenous women, indigenous people weren't allowed to vote until 1934. So that means deaf indigenous people couldn't vote until then, until 1965. So then Black deaf women, think about them voting. And so when we think about the mass of people who have not had access to the vote, who have reached out for their voices to be heard and been discounted, we need everyone to stand together in solidarity. Deaf and hard of hearing people must vote. Any efforts to suppress or marginalize our vote must be met with absolute refusal. We must be counted. We must. Everyone has to vote. History has proven time and again that the more people vote, the greater our country becomes, the more we become what we could be. And so, and this isn't only something for us to be engaged in the fall of an election year. So if you look at Baltimore, for example, the home of the Baltimore Ravens, a little aside, but I'm a big fan. So if you look at the Eastern Shore near the Coastal Bay area, it's largely agricultural versus the industrial area of Baltimore. So very often we see in the industrialized area a Democratic vote, and the agricultural area a more Republican vote. And so people putting off the vote or not engaging in the vote means that the contest doesn't actually take into account all the voices of the people. If both are vibrantly voting, in the spring and the fall, then we have a better sense of the political landscape. This shows why it's so important for everybody to vote and get it done, because that's the way that we can make sure that rising tides lift all boats and all our rights are enhanced.
Thank you, Kelby. You both made very powerful remarks. You said voting is my voice. And it's true. We elect people to represent us in the halls of power, and that is a very powerful statement. And Kelby, you said historically, people have been oppressed, specifically the deaf and hard of hearing community. And so we need to really work hard to unshackle ourselves. Very powerful points from both of you. Thank you. We do have a little bit of time left, and I believe we have a question from the audience. The question is, do you think that the government pays less attention to young people due to their low voter participation? Why or why not? And I will invite any panelist who feels called to do so to turn on their camera. And I'll just repeat the question just to let you digest it a bit. Do you think that the government pays less attention to young people because of a history of low voter participation among younger people? Why or why not? It looks like Joseph has a comment, so I'll invite you to turn your camera on, Joseph.
Yes, great question. I think very often the politics of the US does marginalize young people and pushes us under the rug, because they tend to be the most progressive group, the one most eager for greater change and less interested in the rules that uphold the status quo. So I think very often politicians who are pushing for the younger vote have a greater chance of winning. Obama did a great job of really vitalizing the movement for young voters and capitalized on that. I think there are a number of possible reasons why we see that at play in today's political contest.
Obama is a great example. He was inspirational to so many young people, and we did not get the feeling that he was overlooking us as younger people. And obviously, if young people are inspired, they will get involved. I see that Trisha would also like to answer this question, please.
Yes, if I'm thinking about youth, I think maybe that they're not focused on because politicians might think they're uneducated or not know enough about what's going on to be impactful. I think that young people are thinking about how they can make things successful, how they are, wanting to get involved. They're not having political debates, and if they are, they're soaking all of that information in. If we get more young voters out there, I think we could really turn the tides and we could have politicians more focused on them. You remember the high school shooting on Valentine's Day that occurred in Florida, which of course was very eye-opening and awakening. A number of survivors from the school decided that they had to do something and stood up and spoke out against gun violence and got very, very involved in the political scene, came to DC to march. And a number of people realized, I lost friends who were murdered that day. The issue is access to guns. And they got out there and said their piece. And they stood up against politicians who are very lax on gun control. So if we see more situations like that arise, I think that politicians will wake up and turn their focus on our future leaders.
I think that is a great example. Unfortunately, we've had a number of school shootings, but the one in Florida sticks out. And people have gotten involved. Young people have gotten involved. They have built a movement. And almost every day we see the powerful speeches that they have shared with us. So, and you're a great example. As you shared with us earlier, as a young person, you felt left out. You didn't feel like you were enfranchised into the process.
So true.
We need to change that. We need to change that. But this example gives me faith. We can make change. Unfortunately, at this time, we are out of time. I want to thank you for the questions. I want to thank the panelists for answering the questions. And I'm going to now introduce the audience to our sponsor, CSD's Sign Vote. Kristen Pumphrey will make some closing remarks. Thank you. I'll turn the stage over to you.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me here. I first want to thank the Center for Democracy in Deaf America, CDDA. Thank you so much for hosting this amazing event that's so aligned with our values. In 2016, we created our Sign Vote campaign to encourage deaf people to register to vote. Fast forward to 2020, we're still here with the same mission, but it's evolved. We see a lot of political apathy in our community, and we want to be sure that we are getting people politically engaged with political content that's presented in ASL so that people can clearly articulate and argue the issues at present in our lives, because we need to be sure that our needs are heard, are acknowledged, and we need these conversations to be present in ASL in vibrant ways. So I want to thank you, CDDA, for hosting this. And I also want to recognize all of the other organizations that have been involved in this. Your thoughtfulness, what you brought to bear is so much a treasure to all of us. And I am moved to see these young people debating this with such fervor. You can't ask for more than that. I cannot stress enough how important it is to learn to have debate in civil and respectful ways, engaging with differing views. In 2020, we are living in a time where issues are so present for us in our world that it's become clearer than ever that we must learn how to handle divergent views. We must learn to cross these divides so that we can have meaningful conversations. One of the most important components of that is to listen, to engage, and to understand another's viewpoint. I personally feel that this is a time of many crossroads and pathways. It is the epitome of the boiling point of all that has come to pass before us, has led us to where we are right now, and will determine where we go moving forward. We must be involved. We must register to vote. Go out there, tell all of your friends, tell all of your families to vote. Ask them what their plan is to vote. Have they already gotten their ballots printed? Have they gotten their registration done? Help them. Also, take a good look within. Examine your own values and your own priorities. Figure out what's important to you and let that guide your vote. Let that guide your actions so that you can tell the federal government what it is that you want, what our community wants. We want to see a great deal more of exactly what we're seeing here tonight. Thank you, CDDA, for hosting this.
Wow. So beautifully said, and such a great way to wrap up the event this evening. Thank you so much for your support. All right. I hope you all enjoyed this evening's event and debate, and hope you are prepared for the next 2 to 3 months. We're going to have some more events on the calendar, some discussions about the Electoral College, the upcoming presidential and vice presidential debates, and of course, you can tune in on election night as well. If you're interested in learning more, please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook by typing in Center for Democracy in Deaf America. Also, I would be remiss if I did not thank everyone who made tonight's event possible and did it so beautifully. First off, I'd like to thank GIS and our voice interpreters for this evening. Also, communication services for the deaf. Of course, SignVote, the captioners this evening, NAD, Gallaudet Youth Programs, DPPC. Thank you for co-sponsoring this event. And also Joseph Wu and Jesse Saunders, thank you so much for running everything behind the scenes for us tonight. Very well done. They are representatives of the Gallaudet Youth Programs. And finally, thank you to our wonderful panelists and moderators who took time out of their busy schedule to hang out with us tonight, and encourage all of you to get out there and vote. So I'm going to ask that everybody turn their screens back on, join me, and say good night to everybody who's still watching. Say go vote.
Vote, 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 vote.
Good night, everybody. Good night.
Good night,
Bye,
everyone.
Go vote.
Thank you.
It's important.